All right. Good morning, AIM-HO. Glad to see you on the Thursday morning. Hope everything's going well. Hope you're having a great conference experience thus far. This morning, we are going to start off with an ACUHO-I Foundation update, and then I'll introduce our speakers. So if I could please bring Murray to the stage in order to talk to us a little bit about ACUHO-I Foundation.
Good morning, everybody. So as if you were here Monday morning, I'm Mari Strombaum. I'm the Executive Director of Housing and Dining Services at Colorado State University, but more importantly for AIM-HO purposes, I'm serving as our representative to the ACUHO-I Foundation. And I just wanted to take a couple of seconds this morning to give a great big shout out because we are at 45% of our fundraising goal, which is awesome. And I want you to help us get past 50% before we get back together again on Monday. So here's how you can do that. Right now, we have 24 people who have registered for the auction. So 24 people have gotten us to 45% of the goal, and there are dozens of you yet to still register on the auction site. So please do that. Once you've gotten there, you can bid on items such as gift cards, wireless earbuds, professional development conversations, some rye whiskey donated by our illustrious president with his illustrious beard. You'll get that reference when you read the information about the rye whiskey. Southwest Airlines gift card, and some marvelous Marvel items from Dr. President-elect Kyle Oldham. So you can bid on those items by going to charityauction.bid/AIM-HO, or even easier, you can just go to the Expo button here in Hopin, and all the information you need is right there. There's also a place on that website where you can donate money to the foundation. And our second goal is not only to raise $2,000, but to have everybody who's registered for the conference to donate at least $1. And I have exciting news to announce is that thank you to an anonymous donor who has donated on behalf of the 5 undergraduate and 10 graduate students who are registered for this conference. And they told me they did that because they're so glad that you're all here. And so they wanted to donate on your behalf. So thank you to that person. And then if you would like to donate on behalf of somebody else, just put in your donation and send me a little note to let me know who you've donated on behalf of so I can track how close we're getting to our goal of getting 100% involvement in our commitment to ACUHO-I. So with that, I'll turn it back to Todd and our speakers, and I hope you all are as excited about this session as I am.
Outstanding. Thank you very much for the update. Appreciate it. One of the aspects that we try to talk about is the conference experience and what you wish to go through. So Brian Moffitt and Michelle Barnett were talking what would be something that would be impactful, something that would not only affect us while we were at the conference, but something that we could take back to our home campuses and continue. Around the same time, the ACUHO-I Foundation put out a video as well as a report about the Anti-Racism Task Force and some of the findings that they had come across. We were lucky enough to reach out to the 2 chairs and speak with them and say, would you be willing to come to AIM-HO in order to tell us through their knowledge, not only from watching the video, reading the report, but then also verbally kind of show us a little bit of maybe information through a PowerPoint. So I'd like to introduce 2 of our speakers coming up here in one moment. Starting off with Dr. Luis Jimenez Ainoa is the son of Maria and Jose Jimenez, husband to Evelyn Velasquez, puppy to 4 beautiful children, Yaya, Tito, Chacha, and Tio, and Lala to 1 grandchild, Aaliyah. He is born in Brooklyn and raised in Queens. He grew playing and loving baseball and still does. Yankees, as if you must know. He's currently the Associate Dean of College for Student Living and Wellness at Vascular College. His portfolio includes the Offices of Residential Life, Res Ed, Ops, Student Conduct and Housing, Health Services, Counseling Services, Health Promotion and Education, and Support, Advocacy, and Violence Prevention. He chairs orientation, the Bias Incident Response Team, and the Student Support Network. Lewis has been on a ACUHO-I executive board for the past 3 years as an ex-aficionado member. In 2019, he helped spearhead the inaugural Leadership Academy for the mid-level professionals of color. In 2020, he served as a co-chair to the Anti-Racist Task Force alongside Stephen Harding in CERT. In 2021, he served as the Anti-Racism Initiatives Director. He earned his bachelor's in Black Studies from SUNY New Paltz, his master's in Education and Psychological Development from Boston College, and his PhD in Educational Policy and Leadership Program at the University at Albany, SUNY. His research focuses on Latinx community, athletes, and their student engagement. At his core, the lessons from his grandmother, mother, and generations of Black feminists have stuck with him. Make room at the table for anyone that crosses the threshold of his professional or personal home. This has guided every step and job along the way. Harvard College, Boston College, University of Miami, New York University, Vascar College, Skidmore College, and back to Vascar College. Each one of those jobs was made possible by someone, typically a person of color, who saw something in him and took a chance. Lewis is the creator of the English tongue Latinx Soul. The one-person performance uses a combination of storytelling, poetry, music, and photography. And I'd also like to welcome Dr. Stephen Herden, he, him, his, serves as Assistant Vice President for Student Development and Executive Director of Housing and Residence Life at the University of Dayton. He supports the deans of students in advocating for student success, specifically serving as the Title IX investigator and member of the Division of Student Development's Campus Awareness, Response, and Evaluation Team, the Dean of Students after our rotation for crisis management, and the university's hearing board. Steve also oversees a department that houses over 6,500 undergraduate students in traditional residence halls, apartments, and 450 university-owned houses. Steve holds both bachelor's and master's degrees in English from North Carolina State University. Stephen's professional interests include curricular approach to learning and development, learning organization designs, and trauma stewardship. Since 2015, Steve has served as the faculty for ACPA's Institute on Curricular Approach and most recently serves as a co-chair for the 2020 and 2021 institutes. He also serves as the faculty for the Great Lakes Association of College and University Housing Officers, ACUHO, in 2018 Mid-Level Institute, and the 2019 James C. Grimm National Housing Training Institute. In recognitions for his contributions to the profession, Steve has been selected as a member of ACPA's Diamond Honoree Class for 2022. Effective November of 2021, he will begin his term as president-elect for the Great Lakes Association of the University Housing Officers. I'd like to welcome to the stage our two presenters.
Hi all. Waiting for, is Steve here?
He's coming.
All right. I didn't think you were going to read that whole thing.
Oh, it's well worth hearing about you. Thank you, sir.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, friends. Absolutely.
Here I am.
Okay.
Pleasure.
I'm going to put your on and y'all just let me know.
All right. Well, thank you, Todd, for the introductions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
appreciate that.
the warm welcome. It has been such a pleasure working with you and working with your team in preparation for today. One quick thing, I appreciate your recognition of my PhD, but I don't have one. So, but if you want to give me one, I will take it. But thank you. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Lewis and I are so excited to be with you all today to be able to share what has been a remarkable journey for us, for the team, and that this journey was centered around work that is so incredibly impactful and crucial, not just to our work, but to our lives. And so, Todd, if you would move us to the next slide, if you wouldn't mind. Our learning outcomes for today are as follows. We're going to introduce you to the Anti-Racism Task Force charge and key findings. We're also going to spend some time, you all spending some time in self-reflection, assessing the inclusion level of your campus environment and departments, and also assessing your department's relationship with your campus police. You'll also articulate some strategies for strengthening your department's relationship with your police and articulate strategies for applying the content from today's session. So the way that we have this session organized is that we've kind of broken it up into three parts. We're going to start with the circumstances that really led to the creation of the task force and share with you the charge. The second section of our time together will really focus on the timeline and the approach that we took, not only in meeting the charge, but in really managing and working with the task force, given the personal impact of the work on the members of the task force. And then finally, we'll conclude with really talking about how the work has continued beyond the submission of the report. After each of those sections, we're going to give you some reflection questions just to really think about for yourself as you think about your continued learning, your continued planning beyond today's session and beyond the ACUHO conference. All right, Todd, if you want to move us to the next slide and then the next one.
Thank y'all. So the circumstances. I'd like to take folks back to May of 2020, the end of May, and where you might have been when you heard about George Floyd, or where you might have been when you saw the video, where you might have been when you heard about Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And that's the circumstance. You know, there is a particular, I mean, as student affairs professionals, many of us were coming towards the end of our own semesters. The first 3 months of that, of addressing and dealing with COVID, right? The association kind of garnered resources rather quickly and understood that COVID was going to present challenges, and that we needed to, as an association, right, needed to understand how to support our colleagues and institutions. And when you wake up in May at the end of that semester, for me, to hear about this, right, there is, you know, there's an understanding that there is a responsibility to say something, to do something. As exhausted as I might have been at that particular moment, given the semester and all of the work that we were doing with our students, you know, for me, it was a particular kind of calling, right? And so the anti-racist task force was born out of a response, right, from, as mentioned here, the number of incidents around racism and anti-Blackness and brutality, racially motivated violence. And if you can imagine, right, kind of really continued from that May through the following, the shootings in Atlanta, right? That there were things that were happening around the country that we, as an association, felt a particular responsibility for. Thankfully, President Von Stange affirmed and our particular obligation to say something, to do something, to address injustice, provide support and advocacy on behalf of those who are subject to it. The task force was assembled, you know, by putting out a call and folks responding to that call. Steve actually was not the initial co-chair. Some life circumstances happened to Lisa Freeman, like incredible and beautiful and miraculous life circumstances. And she had to step down from the co-chair responsibility. And, you know, I received the gift in getting to know Stephen. And those are the circumstances. Stephen and I are introduced, and our very first meeting, and this will be a theme that I continue to bring up to folks as we think about the work. Again, as a person of color, I was exhausted, but I certainly felt a particular obligation to do something in this moment. And the first conversation I had with Steve is, the first question I think that we asked each other is, tell us something about your grandmother, or tell me something about your grandmother. And that is where our conversations about what this work was going to look like moving forward, this particular centering of community building between the two of us was essential as two men of color as we co-chaired this task force. You can go to the next slide. And so, yeah, this is the collection of folks, and as you can see, right, the diversity represented here from across the country into Canada. You know, certainly would love to. I'm trying to think through if I could see the fullness of their names here, right? And Harold and Faith and Courtney, Kathleen, Danielle, Stephen and myself, Amanda, Christy, Brian, Dirk, and Aramis. And I want to point out Aramis really quickly because Aramis had lost some confidence and faith in the association, and still decided to apply to participate in this particular endeavor. And the way that we went about doing our work restored some of that faith and confidence, and really placed her, particularly in the work that we started to do in addressing policing on campus, really put her front and center to our association membership. Yeah, I think we have a set of questions for y'all. I don't know how the chat functions works here, if people can participate in the chat function or not. But here are questions that we'd like you to take a couple of minutes to reflect on. So, how would you assess the inclusion level of your campus environment? What factors are contributing to your assessment? How would you characterize your department's relationship with the police, campus safety on your campus? What examples can you provide to support your characterization? And I don't know if there's a way to have folks type some thoughts into the chat if they like to, and if not, that's okay. These are questions for you. This slide, this PowerPoint will be available for folks to take afterwards as well. They can certainly reflect on these questions, but we want you to take a moment to think about, to consider what inclusion looks like on your campus. The factors, again, that contribute to that assessment. And then thinking about the particular relationship, which was a key question for us, is what is residential life's student affairs relationship to campus police, to campus safety, to the elements that provide some level of oversight, right, if you will, surveillance in some cases, right, of students and their bodies. And not just students, right, administrators, faculty as well. Steve, did you want to move us forward?
Move us forward.
I don't think there's a way for folks to participate in the chat.
But that's. But again, so again, I will emphasize what Louis just said. You know, we place the reflection questions here again as an opportunity for you to take some notes. To, you know, so often when we're in these moments, particularly when we are able to step away from the immediacy of our work environment and to be in a space of learning. I'll speak from my own experience that so much I'm able to, there are revelations and epiphanies that I'm able to reach in a conference setting or in environments that are centered around learning, and how quickly that can dissipate as you return to the immediacy of your work. And so again, the purpose of these questions is really to give you an opportunity to do some assessment around your environment, and other factors that we'll touch upon a little bit later, so that that learning isn't lost, so that as you continue your own work and learning, as well as continue this work as a collective department, that you're able to capture that this moment isn't lost, and those epiphanies and revelations that are happening for you aren't lost because you've returned back to work and are now thrust in the environment that can often function like an ER for many of us. Next slide, please, Todd, and move us to the next. So in terms of the task force timeline and approach, the task force had 10 to 12 weeks to complete the work. And then, you know, if you all recall 2020, which feels long ago, but not really, COVID decided that it was going to upend everything. And so before we could get started, we were already managing the impact of COVID on all of our respective campuses. And while we had a scheduled hiatus in August to focus on opening and starting off the year to the best of our abilities, recognizing that much of what we were creating, we were building processes and procedures, you know, as they were happening at times. I think we underestimated the true impact of COVID and how that would impact the start of the year. And so we were not able to get started as quickly as we would have liked. And it was also important to us that we didn't rush this process, because not only is the work important to our departments, to our universities, it's also important to us as well as people. And so we wanted to be efficient with our time, but at the same time honor and respect the process that was going to lead to the outcome being the report and recommendation. So we adjusted our timeline immediately. And what was supposed to be an October deadline turned into a December deadline. And I'm very thankful that we took the time, that we were able to do that, and that we were supported in doing so. It was also really important to us to create a task force that had some understanding. The balance of what I mean by that, I will help if I complete a sentence. What it was important to us that we balanced task and relationship. We understood the charge, we understood the now newly developed timeline, and it was important to us to produce a product that not only that we were proud of, but that also we felt sort of served as a springboard for the continuation. How do we continue to keep this topic at the forefront of our attention? How does this not become something that becomes a tag on to other responsibilities, but can become the context by how we actualize and approach our work? And so we also recognized in order to do that, it was important to create an environment that was not only centered around learning, but that was also centered around compassion and healing, recognizing that we have to acknowledge our past and the trauma it has created for us. We have to recognize our past, particularly our past around racism, in order to be in a position to make recommendations about our future, a different future, a future that's going to require a significant shift away from what we know and require us to sit in the discomfort of what we don't know in order to be who we aspire to be. And that was going to take some time, but that the process of getting there, centering our work around compassion and healing and recognizing the trauma, its impact, its continual impact, was important for us. Louis mentioned earlier how he and I started to develop our relationship. And again, we didn't know each other coming into this experience, and we have become great friends since because of the connection that we have. And I'm so blessed and thankful not only to have shared this experience with Louis, but with the other members of the task force as well. Coming into this experience, I knew one of the other members, and everybody else I was meeting for the first time. But we knew that in order to do the work and to do it responsibly, the community we created would have to be situated around trust, that we would have to take risks around our learning. And can we have an environment where we can begin to establish trust and to set standards for what that looks like, so that as we reach moments of impasse, that those moments of impasse can be opportunities for greater growth and development and learning, and can be less about pointing fingers and drawing conclusions about others' motives. So how can we begin to create an environment where we're getting to know each other on a more intimate level, so that we can have trust, that we can have forgiveness, we can have mercy, benefit of the doubt, all of what will be needed in order to do this work responsibly and to do it from a collective understanding. And so that the conversation that Louis mentioned, that the topic about our grandmothers, that led to a very lengthy discussion between the two of us, was our first activity. And it was amazing to hear how others, to learn what we learned about others and their experiences and their backgrounds and the relationships, and how relationships are so important to who they have become today, and the value for community. And so one of the things I look back on in this experience is recognizing just how important that piece was, and that it's something that we can skip over or fast track without, and what we're doing is that we are not truly appreciating the process that's getting us there, and to be able to move at an efficient pace, but at the same time not be so focused on the outcome that we skip over parts of the process that are important for the group's development, but also for the quality of the work. As we got deeper into the work, we split into 3 different subgroups, and I'm going to touch upon each of those groups in just a moment. The subgroups were around the straw poll analysis of the straw poll that had been released in October of 2020 about the culture of our campuses and our relationship with the police. We were going into that experience, we were going to create more straw polls, and we decided to pause and really take a deeper dive around the data that we had collected from the straw poll that had just recently been released and completed by the association. We also wanted to focus on the history of the association. We have to have some understanding of our past to understand its influence on our present in order to create a new and different future. And then finally, looking at the professional standards. If the professional standards and their relationship to the core competencies and the curriculum are really the foundation of our association and provide that context for how we approach our work, then this is an opportunity for us to do a deeper dive around how the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what's its role in the review of these standards, and where do we need to make edits as we think about the incorporation of this in our work and it not becoming a tag on. Next slide, please. So starting with the straw poll analysis, as I said, we decided to focus on take a deeper understanding of, the campus culture and the role and presence of the police. And some of the questions that guided our work were the following. So how do we as practitioners perceive practitioners perceive their campus environments from an inclusion perspective since summer of 2020. Since summer of 2020, what material changes have occurred on campuses and in departments around anti-racism efforts? Since 2020, what role has campus police, security, public safety played on campus in addressing racial bias and advocating for anti-racism? And in what ways have working relationships between campus housing departments and campus police, security, public safety changed? Next slide. So some of the key findings were the following: that we learned that there was a variety of different structures and relationships with the police, and some of that was dictated by the structure on campus. So a good majority of the participants reflected that their campus police had jurisdiction both on and off campus. We had some structures where campus police had jurisdiction on campus, but not off campus. Thereby necessitating a relationship with that city's police. And then we had a smaller percentage of respondents who indicated that their structure was really around campus security. So their police, they not necessarily have a police department, but a campus security department. Professionals in the field define anti-racism efforts progress change differently. In different ways. That for some, it's the existence of policies, programs, advisory groups, available training. For others, efforts of this nature simply to be checking a box. I think for, depending upon how you identify, for some, and depending upon the position that you held, for some, these examples were significant indicators for change. For others, it was merely performative acts that are being treated as indicators of change. And I think as we looked at that based upon how folks identified and where they fell within their university or within their department structure or within their division structure, we saw some patterns around that were intriguing. In matters where organizational structure and responsibility for anti-racism efforts live, respondents shared that their professionals were tasked with operationalizing their campuses or departments' anti-racism efforts were either white or ill-suited for the type of work. So they didn't have the training or the background, but rather this may have been a personal passion or of interest for someone. And what we realized is that our infrastructure has to guide our success, and that for far too long we've relied upon personal passion and personal interest to guide and direct the evolution of our work, and that we've got to shift that now to the systems that we have in play, and the infrastructure supporting those systems have to drive the work. And that they also illustrate that work does not have a priority. So there was some respondents that indicated that this was work that was tasked for a graduate student. So the person with the least positional authority in the organization is now tasked with the complexity of chairing or shepherding their department through their anti-racism efforts. Next slide. So in terms of the history of the association, again, our goal was to look at the history. We have to have a history and an understanding of our association, and really have to focus on what that history is in order to know its impact on the present in order to create a new future. And so the questions here is what guided that subgroup's work. What are the critical moments of the association history, such as the representation of Black members in leadership positions, conference topics, etc.? Over time, how has the association responded to critical moments, incidents of racism and race and racism in the United States and globally? What were the contributions of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, so our BIPOC members, to the association? How has the association demonstrated increased understanding of and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the path towards anti-racism? And then finally, how has DEI language evolved? One of the things I will also mention is that the questions that were guiding the work were not given to us. These are questions that we, as we discussed where we wanted to focus our time and attention as a task force, we decided to focus on the foundational aspects, because again, structure, foundation, all of that is going to be important for the long-term sustainability and evolution of the work and of our work. And so we not only focused on these three areas, but the questions that we came up for each were the creation of the task force in meetings and discussions that we had before we broke into our smaller groups. Next slide, please. So some of the findings are the following: that there's no formal timeline of racism existed. So in some ways for this group, it was piecing together a puzzle, so to speak, and that the history of the association, which is a book, and the ACUHO-I library served as springboards for this project. So there was some resources in place that helped to kind of guide this group in its understanding of our history, but there was no formal timeline, as we mentioned. BIPOC participation has been present from the beginning. As early as 1959, the association was faced with acknowledging the segregation and racist policies in existence on member campuses. They decided against making a statement. During the 1972 annual business session, significant changes were made to the Constitution and bylaws, and those changes included modification of Article 2 to emphasize the association's purpose and posture with regard to the question of sex, race, color, creed, and national origin. And for those of you who've read the report, that is in an Appendix A. For the minutes and the modification. So more detail is captured there. The association has elected 5 Black male presidents, and to date, no Black woman has been selected in the presidential role. A pre-conference on racism was implemented in 1977. This was also the same year that the first woman served in the role of the president of as president of the association. Next slide, please. HBCU outreach has been noted several times in the history of the association, including efforts in 1974, 1990, and 2002. And that DEI positions on the executive board were created in the following sequence. In 1990, it was the multicultural consultant. In 2008, that changed to the inclusion and equity director. That is still the title to this day. And as we know, that Lisa Freeman is currently occupying that position. The Professionals of Color Network was established in 2015, and the first president of the association, S. Earl Thompson, grew up in Anna, Illinois, and was the director of the residential life at university when it was first integrated. Lewis and I spent some time really looking at his role and the circumstances that kind of dictated the culture at the time, and some of the incredible challenges. Particularly around race. And Lewis, if you want to comment more, I'm going to give you an opportunity in just a second, because I know that was a topic that you and I had lots of conversations you and I had about our understanding of the association's first president and the time and the circumstances that were kind of driving his leadership. The ACUHO-I Leadership Academy for Mid-Level Res Life Professionals of Color was established in 2019, and in 1987, the association offered a race and racism handbook. Lewis, before I move us on, you were a part of this group. You were a significant contributor to this group. Is there anything that you want to add, any further insights you want to add before I move us to the professional standards?
I mean, the bullet points kind of speak for themselves. I mean, part of that sense of like, there's a history of the association. Again, it's a PDF. You can find that online, but it does not tackle, this conversation around race and racism, and kind of provide this kind of association stance. I mean, you start to see that it's a much more recent phenomenon for the association. And again, just to kind of highlight, it's either been white folk as presidents of the association, or the 5 Black men that have been elected. Not just simply Black women have not been elected to the president's role, but neither have Asian identified Latinx folks in those roles. And so it's just we've got work to do. I think that's part of what when we're digging into the history, it's with this intent, with this particular focus and excavation of where are we lacking, where have people and particular labor. And while we certainly focus on the president's role, like the labor of folks of color within the association have essentially been invisible. And that's part of the task, is how do we make visible that particular labor.
Thank you. And we'll move to professional standards. So again, this working group was tasked with reviewing the most recent version of recently published professional standards document, as well as the ACUHO-I body of knowledge and core competencies, to understand how they might connect. And this group also worked independently to write recommendations. Now, this happened in coordination with Dr. Amanda Knurr, who's serving as the chair of the Professional Standards Committee, because at the time there was a group that was being convened, a task force that was being convened to do a deeper analysis of the standards and their relationship to the body of knowledge and core competencies as we seek to make the standards not only more visible, but more applicable to our day-to-day work, and looking at that at all levels. So we had an all levels within an organization. So we had an opportunity to now add a further layer of complexity, but I think a necessity. And how do we look at that now through the lens of DEI? And how does our work now intersect with the charge and the work of this task force? So questions that guided our work here: where do ACUHO-I professional standards currently provide effective guidance related to equity, inclusion, and justice? Where do they not reflect those values and concepts? Who uses the professional standards now, and how are they used? And what should access and implementation look like in the future? And then what recommendations should be made to Professional Standards Committee for future revisions? What should ACUHO-I do as an association to ensure that the standards reflect the diversity of the membership and remain up to date in terms of concepts, issues, and language? And how can the association better educate and support members through the professional standards? Next slide, please. So some of the findings are followed. This working group did completed a review of the most recent iteration of professional standards, and they did a really thorough and deep dive around this, a deeper analysis around this in ways that they thoroughly examined the standards. This was a significant amount of work on behalf of this group, and they came back with suggested edits, additions, omissions made by the subgroup in writing. The entire document will need an extensive overhaul in terms of language and references to ensure it reflects currently used terms and topic and concepts. There was a lot of inconsistency that they found through that deeper analysis that surfaced, that there isn't an inconsistent use of concepts and terms, and that there's also a need for a refresh as well. The document doesn't really reference in general concepts of inclusion, equity, and justice. So how do we balance having competencies around equity, inclusion, and justice, but at the same time not creating its own silo so that the other areas of the professional standards are not thought about within that context? And the professional standards seem to be generally disconnected from other foundational documents like the body of knowledge and core competencies and the core curriculum, which should be remedied in time. And I think anecdotally, we all felt that way. And I think upon a deeper analysis, it kind of came to fruition in their work and in the recommendations that they offered, which are captured in the report. So as we move to the next slide, I want you to think about these questions, and we're going to give you a couple minutes to reflect before we move to the third section of our discussion. What opportunities exist for greater collaboration partnership with your campus police? What strategies can you employ to strengthen your partnership? So we talked about your assessment of that relationship earlier. So now we're moving into going a step further and asking you to really look at strategies that you can employ to strengthen the partnership with the police. How would you characterize the inclusion level of your department, and what changes need to occur in your department to make it more inclusive? And of those changes, what do you have the influence to impact? So we talked about you assessing your campus environments, the culture within your campuses. We're taking that a step further, and now you doing that assessment of your department, but also recognizing what needs to change within your infrastructure, within your organizational, really focusing on the learning organization aspect of this work. And then finally, what do you know about your campus department and its history? And in what ways can this information be helpful to you? So take a couple minutes. By my clock, it's 11:41 Eastern Standard Time, I think 9:41 your time. So take a couple minutes just to jot down some notes. We know that we're not able to give you enough time to fully answer these questions, but to get some thinking started and jot down some notes, so that as you reflect upon this session, your learning individually and your learning collectively as a team can continue. Take about one more minute. just to jot down just a few notes, few thoughts, initial thoughts to each of those questions. All right, I'm going to go ahead now, my friend Lewis, and turn it back over to you.
You set me kind of just thinking about all of that work, and again, just yeah, I just think back on it as we were entering the fall semester and our campuses were coming back, and how exhausted we were. But each of those meetings, it wasn't just that we met monthly as a group, or actually bi-weekly as a group. We had to meet with our subgroups
In between.
in between time. Absolutely, yeah, just really appreciative of the community and the work there. The continuation of the work, we could just, yeah. Here's some examples of that, but I think one of the things for both Steve and I is that we were going to produce recommendations, right? We were going to kind of, here's what we found, what we're seeing, what we're hearing. Here are some recommendations. And the last thing that we wanted to do is to have that labor, right, sit on somebody's desk and for the association to not do anything with it, the executive board to not do anything with it. You know that it happens on your own campuses. These things happen, recommendations are made, they then get kind of put aside, sometimes because there are other things to do, right? And what we wanted to say is like, yes, that exists. We have a lot of other work to do, and we need to ensure that there is some accountability moving forward. Some of the ways that we've done that, even the release of the recommendations and the task force report, is that we still meet monthly to this day with the ACUHO-I president, and Pete, and with Mary De Niro, and to talk about diversity initiatives, to talk about where are we with the things that we recommended moving forward. So what are some of those things that were produced as a result of the work? The fireside chat, which offered opportunity for members to sit down with, or virtually with Stephen and I, to talk about, and the members of the committee to talk about the report. We created a podcast. We wanted to ensure that there was some archiving of the history of the association's history around race and racism. And one of the first ways that we did that was to have all, except for one, Black presidents, former Black presidents, and the incoming Black president, Leon McClinton, recorded a podcast. And then our intention is to have a podcast with the chairs of the Professionals of Color Network. We want to make sure that there's record of this labor, of their experiences within the association and in the profession. We're currently reviewing the association's diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. We're sitting down and really kind of thinking about the language that needs to be present in a statement in 2021. Again, the review of the core documents. We had during a general session, we had a session on campus policing. I mentioned Aramis's work previously on dissertation. The ACUHO-I, the central staff, took it upon themselves, upon the recommendation, to go through a JEDI, if you will, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion training. And that particular training impacted the way that they conducted the job search for several key positions within the central office, and ended up in the hiring of 2 professionals of color in that office, diversifying that office. With that didn't happen by chance. And lastly, that the Leadership Academy, the recommendation from the task force and from the previous Leadership Academy, given the kind of the lack of Black women in key roles in the association, particularly in the presidency role, we wanted to have the Leadership Academy focus in on Black women and their experiences and to provide that support there. You can go to the next slide. Here's some additional reflection questions for y'all. What strategies will you employ to continue your learning beyond this point? Again, for how do you, we're here presenting. How do I, how does Steve, how does Todd, how do you strategize to continue your learning beyond today? What strategies you will employ to educate others in your department about what you have learned today? Now, I've been talking about this recently with my own team is, we've been working in crisis mode for a long time, being very responsive. This kind of work requires a level of intentionality and thought and strategy to ensure that it isn't just a solo endeavor, but a communal, a collective, a departmental endeavor. And what resources will you need to enact change in your department? I think we'll share this again in a little while in our wrap up. But the reason Steve and I think had a successful task force, mm-hmm. and the reason we continue to stay connected to the work is because the association provided us with resources, particularly in Holly Stapleton, who is an absolute angel, to continue to do the work, to help guide us in how we could finish this, get this task force done, and then what we can do moving forward. You need support like that, and particularly for Holly and her own identities, you need allies like that. I needed an ally like that to do the work. So think about those questions. We'll provide another minute here. Any of these things that you want to respond to in the chat. Again, strategies for yourself, strategies for your department, and an identification of the resources that you need to enact change. A comment there that is very much related to these reflection questions as well. In our last few minutes here. We'll do the next slide real quick.
So we have about 5 minutes for any questions that you all have before we give you some sort of wrap up, sort of takeaway items to help in continuing that learning, both individually and collectively. So any questions that you all may have for us about anything we've shared, our experience, anything that's intriguing to you all about our journey and the continuation of that journey, because as Louis mentioned, that it hasn't stopped and it has continued, and we're very thankful for that. But we wanted to make sure that you all had some time to ask us any questions before we share our sort of wrap up takeaway items. And again, feel free to use the chat. If you also want to use the chat to kind of share with one another, kind of how is this resonating with you? What space are you in? How is it impacting you in terms of what we have shared about our respective journey? Where are you finding meaning, and how is our journey helping helping you to move forward? Here, I just now see a question. From Michelle, do you have any recommendations for colleges that don't have any type of DEI department on campus? No official leaders in this area. I mean, I think where I immediately go with that question is around, I think what COVID has taught us, and I think the pandemic around racial injustice is also teaching us, is that there are no absolutes. And I think so often, and I think the other piece is that structure has to drive success. And so I think what is also happening is we're now at a place where I think we're at a bit of a crossroads in terms of higher education in general. That is definitely true, I believe, in Housing and Residence Life Department. But this is a great opportunity to reevaluate our purpose. And that as we reevaluate our purpose, how closely aligned is our practice with our purpose? And what do we need to, and what needs to be different moving forward in order for that alignment to be greater and to increase that alignment? And I think so often we rely upon the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion to be the cure-all for the campus, or that we rely upon the Office of Multicultural Affairs, or on our campus it's the Multi-Ethnic Education and Engagement Center. And what ends up happening is we end up creating silos. And I think right now, as we rediscover our purpose, I think we will find that we all have a commitment and a responsibility to this work. And it's about recognizing what our contribution will be to a topic that and work that impacts all of us on a personal and professional level. So that would be my response.
Yeah, I'm at a small liberal arts college in the Hudson Valley here in New York, and we don't have a chief diversity officer. I'm grateful though when I arrived back at Vassar in 2019, the Engaged Pluralism Initiative had been set off. And what that has done, and the way that I stated, is that it has democratized participation in justice, diversity, equity, inclusion work. And so there are more than 100 people from our staff, unionized staff, to our faculty, to administrators, and certainly our students who are working collectively on a variety of fronts addressing issues of justice and equity, inclusion, diversity. And that, I think, has been transformative, this sense that I am not alone. I'll be in a session tomorrow with about 30 other folks for about 6 hours going through a relational uprising training. And to know that it doesn't just fall on the shoulders of one person, but this kind of collective endeavor of the institution has really made a difference for me. And I engage my work, or the folks that I'm responsible for, but that institutionally there's hope for me. And as a person of color, I need that. I frequently ask the question, like, why am I in this space doing this work in 2021?
I think for me, where I've spent a lot of my time with my team right now, because the other piece is that I had to shift my focus away from spending my time focusing on trying to influence others or circumstances that were outside of my control. Where's my sphere of influence, and where does my agency lie? And so I've been focusing specifically on my team, and really us going back as we revisit our purpose, but really starting with, do we have a collective understanding of what constitutes a learning organization? So as we begin to build a new structure, as we begin to build a new future, we're going to need a structure to support the outcomes that we're seeking. We can no longer rely upon inherently racist, inherently discriminatory practices, structures, and systems, and hope for liberation and inclusion as the outcome, that we're going to have to create new. Well, that's going to create a lot of discomfort. And I think as Housing and Residence Life departments, and as the assistant vice president and executive director of Housing and Residence Life here at the University of Dayton, at what pace do we need to move at, and what is the content that we're going to operate with collectively? So my department meetings are no longer about updating about this process, this or that. It's about how are we engaging across all levels around a topic that has implications for all of us. And so as we build this structure, how do we now look at that through a DEI lens, so that our structure is guided by its creation, is guided by that, and it's not something we're trying to retrofit at a later point in time. But that's taken some work, and it's some continual work, and so a lot of discomfort, but that's the messiness of learning and the stuff that I love. So I've got lots of patience for that. I see that we have about 3 minutes according to my clock. So want to be respectful of everyone's time. And there's a final slide on the PowerPoint for the wrap-up section. And these are just, we wanted to share just, I think, some takeaways that might be helpful for you all as you process your responses to the questions and determine next steps moving forward. Again, perfection is not our goal. Our pursuit is excellence. You will make mistakes along the way. Your mistakes are not an evaluation or an indictment of your potential, your leadership, your competence, but rather moments for greater learning. The key is, what questions are we asking in the moment to understand the lesson that should be learned, and what are we going to do collectively and individually to apply that lesson? Often we conflate the two. They're very different concepts with very different outcomes. When you create a working group, and we touched upon this earlier, to address issues of inequity, make sure they have what they need in terms of moving forward. So in terms of resources, who's your Holly, who's your Grant, who are those folks that are going to be allies for you, but also resources for you as you move this forward, our work forward collectively. The learning can't stop with today's session. Both individually and collectively, there are lessons to be learned. And so how are both of those processes happening simultaneously to move our work forward responsibly and effectively? It is acceptable to say, I don't know. So often we've been shamed. I can think of experiences in my past when I've been shamed about, I don't know. And then we're worried about people wanting to seek out perfection. Well, we often create the circumstances where perfection is the outcome by how we treat others when they don't know. We can't be expected to know all the answers. That's not a reality any one of us can successfully maintain. I don't know is an important statement, and being confident in saying I don't know helps to inform your next steps for how you get the answers you need to be effective for yourself as well as for others. Vulnerability is a sign of strength, not weakness. I think as we think about engaging with each other holistically, there are going to be moments where we learn a lot about ourselves and a lot about each other. And can we show vulnerability and admit when we don't know or when we've made mistakes? Can we own our mistakes in a way that allows us to make amends, but also those mistakes can guide our continued learning and development? We have a responsibility as leaders to educate, to create learning environments that celebrate and embrace all identities. We have to look at our work more holistically. We have to look at our staff, our students, our colleagues, our leadership more holistically. So often we force people to compartmentalize themselves and to only show up in ways that are about our comfort or the comfort of the person or people that possess the positional authority, power, and influence. And no longer can we continue to operate in that with that mindset and value inclusion, liberation, equity, and want to be anti-racist in our work. Again, we cannot rely upon fractured, inherently racist systems to achieve inclusion and liberation. We will have to create new systems, new structures if we want different outcomes. So there you go. I think we're right now at 12 o'clock our time. That would be 10 o'clock your time, I believe, if my math is correct. That is not a gift and strength of mine. But we want to say thank you for the opportunity, and we hope that you have found our time with you helpful in your respective journeys. Todd, thank you for all of your support, your assistance, and throughout all of this, to your team's assistance. It's been a pleasure working with all of you in creating this opportunity. And Louis and I are very happy and excited to have had the opportunity to share our work and the work of others who are not present with us today. So thank you all very much.
Likewise, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Louis, Stephen, truly, that was a monumental presentation of a start of a path that we're going to continue to walk. And we're going to be walking it next week also when we go through all of our identity groups next week. You see probably that emails are being shared, so please reach out. Please make sure to read the ACUHO-I anti-racism outcomes, as well as watch the fireside chat. It was something that influenced this group in order to reach out to these individuals and say, please, we'd love to have you come in and share your knowledge and expertise with us. So thank you once again upon AIMHO. We truly appreciate your time, effort, and your diligence for the topic. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
I'll make a quick announcement. I'm sorry, Luce, did you say?
No, just thank you for the time and attention and care.
Excellent.
You will.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. So just a quick programmatic announcement for AIMHO. The hop-in schedule has been updated. The roundtables are happening at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, which is Phoenix, or 11 a.m. Mountain Direct Time, Denver time, not 10 a.m. Mountain Direct Time as originally stated. So it's been updated. Thank you very much for that update, Letha. Appreciate your time. Good luck, everyone. Have a great rest of your conference experience.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.